Before sunrise, Joanne Witt lay lifeless in her bedroom. Her 14-year-old daughter Tyler and Tyler's 19-year-old boyfriend Stephen Culver were already gone. Tyler Marie Witt grew up in a quiet suburb outside Sacramento. She lived with her mother, Joanne Witt. Joanne worked for El Dorado County as an engineer. She raised Tyler alone after earlier family troubles. By early 2009, Tyler was a freshman in high school. She spent a lot of time at a local coffee shop. There she met a man named Stephen Paul Culver, who some people called Boston. He was older, in his late teens or early 20s. The relationship that formed between them became the center of everything that followed. From the outside, it looked like a secret teenage romance. The age gap was large. Court records and news reports show they quickly started hiding their contact. Their meetings became private and intimate. Joanne found a journal Tyler kept. The entries described their relationship in ways that showed it had moved past friendship. Alarmed, Joanne took the journal to the police. She reported that Culver had been involved with someone who was underage. That report to law enforcement is what prosecutors later said changed everything. They argue that once the mother reached out for help, the pair moved from secrecy into planning a harmful act. On the night of June 11, 2009, the quiet house became a scene of cruelty. Prosecutors say Tyler gave her mother a drink that contained a sedative. Joanne fell asleep. Tyler then let Culver into the home. Joanne was later found under a blanket on sheets soaked in red stains. She had more than 20 wounds to her upper body. The injuries showed the harm was close up and sustained. After the event, Tyler and Culver left the area. Police found and arrested them in San Bruno a short time later. At first, they gave different accounts. Each later accused the other of being the person who caused Joanne's wounds. How did two young people reach this point? In court testimony and pretrial interviews, Tyler described Culver as having a strong influence over her. She said he acted like a romantic figure who convinced her their relationship mattered most. She said they talked about a plan inspired by Romeo and Juliet, where they would run away together and never return. After Joanne filed the report, Tyler said the plan changed. Instead of both of them dying, they decided to give Joanne pills to make her sleep so she could not stop them, and then the two would run away. The prosecution said the motive combined fear of being exposed, a desire to stay together, and revenge against the mother who intervened. Their argument was that Culver used Tyler's loyalty and their intimate relationship to move from influence to action. The legal proceedings were covered closely by local and national media. Tyler accepted a plea agreement before Culver's trial. She pleaded guilty to a second-degree charge tied to the fatal event in exchange for testifying against Culver. That plea meant she avoided a first-degree conviction and the most severe sentence. Under the agreement, she was given 15 years to life, with a path to parole set by the terms of the plea. Culver rejected a similar deal and went to trial. The jury convicted him on a first-degree charge tied to the event and sentenced him to life with no possibility of parole. A central issue at trial was the conflicting testimony. Tyler said she could not bring herself to inflict the wounds, and that Culver did it. Culver at times tried to shift blame or raise doubt. The jury concluded Culver was the main actor in the event. Trial testimony offered a detailed account of the night and what led up to it. Tyler said she poured the sleeping pills into her mother's drink. She said she stood outside the bedroom while Culver went inside carrying objects he used to harm Joanne. Witnesses later described Culver coming out of the bedroom with red stains on his clothing. The prosecution stressed that the plan involved sedating Joanne, entering the home, and nailing down the timing. They argued this showed coordination rather than a sudden fight. Defense attorneys raised other possibilities, including the idea that Culver might have taken responsibility to protect Tyler, or that some testimony did not match exactly. Still, the jury found the evidence supported the prosecution's version. The sentencing marked the legal end of the case. Tyler's plea meant she served many years in custody, but also kept a route to parole. She served time at the Central California Women's Facility. Culver's sentence with no parole meant he will remain in prison for the rest of his life. The different outcomes raised questions about how the justice system treats young people who act under influence, and whether a person who helps plan a fatal event but says they did not deliver the fatal wounds should get the same punishment as the person who did. As for remorse and later statements, Tyler spoke at hearings and in interviews. She described her youth, a troubled upbringing, and the influence Culver had over her. Records show she became eligible for parole sooner than a life term would allow under her plea terms. On August 26, 2022, the parole board recommended her release. She was later released in 2023 after the parole process. Two questions stand out. Why did she help? and who actually carried out the act that ended Joanne's life? Prosecutors and Tyler herself pointed to emotional dependence, secrecy, and fear of losing Culver as reasons why she became involved. Tyler said he told her things that made her feel she had to go along, and that she would have done anything for him. The question of who actually carried out the act became the focus of the trial. The jury's verdict, bolstered by Tyler's testimony, led the court to hold Culver principally responsible. That is the legal resolution, though people continue to have different views about moral blame and responsibility. The next 16-year-old was soft-spoken, looked harmless, but what she did across the street from an elementary school would change history. Brenda Spencer was a quiet, thin redhead who lived in a small house right across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego. She was born on April 3, 1962, and was the youngest of 3 children. Her parents divorced when she was still a child. Her mother ended the marriage after learning about her father's relationships with other women. Reports later described their home as unstable, with heavy drinking, money problems, and, according to Brenda's own statements during parole hearings, claims of neglect and mistreatment. Her parents denied those claims. The contradictions around her early life created confusion that made it hard for anyone to fully understand what came later. On the morning of January 29, 1979, the neighborhood's calm routine was shattered. Children were walking toward school. The principal and a custodian were opening the gates. Inside a house across the street, a teenage girl picked up a small caliber rifle and began shooting from her bedroom window. She fired dozens of rounds toward the group of people outside. Her targets included children, school staff, and even an officer who came to help. In total, about 36 shots were fired. 2 adults lost their lives, and 9 others were injured. 8 were children, and 1 was a police officer. The scene was pure panic. Rescuers used a garbage truck to block her line of sight and protect others. The rifle she used had been a gift. The situation lasted several hours until the police surrounded her home and convinced her to surrender. When asked why she did it, her response shocked everyone. A reporter who called homes in the area reached her by chance. Her reply was, "I don't like Mondays." That single line became famous, repeated in headlines, and even turned into a song. But that answer didn't explain anything. It sounded like a mix of anger and emptiness. In later hearings, Brenda said she had hoped the police would end her life. She also talked about drinking, using substances, and family problems. But none of those reasons fully explained what she did. So why would a 16-year-old do something so extreme? It seemed to be a mix of emotional pain, a wish to shock people, and easy access to a weapon that turned her frustration into tragedy. The aftermath felt like a nightmare for the community. The principal, Burton Ragg, and the custodian, Michael Sucker, lost their lives while trying to protect the children. Ambulances rushed the injured to hospitals. Parents and neighbors were in tears, desperately searching for answers. Police surrounded Brenda's house, talked her into surrendering, and took her into custody. She was later charged as an adult for 2 counts of ending lives and multiple counts of serious harm to others. She didn't go through a long trial. Instead, she pleaded guilty. On April 4, 1980, the day after her 18th birthday, she received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Her time in prison was not quiet. She was moved through California's correctional system and diagnosed with epilepsy and depression. She worked repairing electronic equipment while serving her sentence. Brenda faced the parole board several times over the years. In her first hearing in 1993, she again said she had hoped police would end her life that day. In later hearings, she repeated claims about her father's mistreatment, which he continued to deny. Each hearing reopened the emotional wounds of the victims and their families. They came to speak about their pain and to argue against her release. These sessions were not just about rules. They were about memory, loss, and whether someone could ever make up for what happened. The phrase, "I don't like Mondays," stayed in people's minds for decades. It was a short, almost childish response that seemed to ignore the gravity of what she had done. People wanted a clear reason, something that made sense. Instead, they got an empty shrug, and that scared them even more. The event forced schools and communities across America to face new fears. Discussions began about security, mental health, and how families could recognize warning signs. There were also stricter rules about firearm storage. Still, the feeling of vulnerability never fully went away. Over time, parole boards reviewed her case again and again. They looked at her age during the event, her behavior in prison, and her level of rehabilitation. But survivors and prosecutors continued to oppose her release. For them, the pain and the memory were still alive. In February 2025, the Board of Parole again denied Brenda Spencer's release. The decision was supported by the San Diego County District Attorney's Office and welcomed by victims and their families. They said the choice reflected how deeply that day had affected their lives. One weapon had changed an entire neighborhood forever. An ordinary morning. Children walking to school, buses running, coffee brewing, turned into chaos. After that day, parents were afraid to let their kids walk alone. Schools increased security. The community learned to be cautious even in the most routine moments. The incident also changed how the country viewed safety at schools. It became one of the first cases that made America realize such events could happen anywhere. It was a painful reminder that one moment of rage can alter countless lives. The next case started with teenage arguments, but by the time police arrived, 2 parents were gone and their daughter was missing. Cynthia Alvarez grew up in a small mobile home community in Compton. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other but didn't ask many questions. By October 2011, she was a teenager who sometimes skipped classes and kept mostly to herself. Court files later revealed that her home life was difficult. She lived with her mother, Gloria Villalta, and her stepfather, Jose Lara, in the same trailer where she often said she felt trapped. Records and reports showed a girl who seemed ordinary from the outside, but had a private history that became central to her defense. She said that she had faced years of mistreatment at home. Those claims were debated heavily in court, but jurors focused more on what they saw as planning and actions rather than her past experiences. What began as arguments at home, according to the timeline from state attorneys, turned into something far more serious over just a few days in mid-October 2011. They said Cynthia and her boyfriend, Giovanni Gallardo, carried out a harmful plan inside the family trailer. Officials claimed the 2 teenagers had carefully prepared what they were about to do. Evidence and witness statements supported that version of events. After the incident, investigators said the couple placed Jose Lara in a shallow grave near a Long Beach high school. Gloria Villalta was found in a vacant lot in Norwalk, wrapped and bound, with her head covered. One detail that caught public attention was Cynthia's later statement. She admitted that she and Gallardo went shopping for Halloween party supplies while her mother's body was still in the back of the Jeep. That image, 2 teenagers shopping while hiding such a thing, stayed in everyone's mind during the trial. Authorities said the motive was both petty and cold. They claimed the pair took jewelry and car parts from the victims and traded them for cash to buy party items. To the public, that explanation sounded shocking, an act driven by greed and carelessness. The defense, however, told a different story. Cynthia took the witness stand and described a long history of harm at home. She said her stepfather had mistreated her and her mother often hit her. She also said her boyfriend had been controlling and sometimes aggressive. Her lawyers argued that Cynthia had acted out of fear and pressure. They said she was not an equal partner in what happened, but a frightened teenager manipulated by others. The jury had to decide whether her story showed fear and coercion or participation in planning. So why did the jury still find her guilty? Much of that came from Cynthia's own words. On the stand, she admitted that she had given Gallardo a signal when her mother walked from the kitchen to the bedroom. Prosecutors said that signal was the moment to act. Jurors also saw handwritten notes Cynthia had passed to Gallardo while he hid inside the trailer. In one note, she wrote phrases like, "What about if she going to her bed? Can you do it then?" Those messages, combined with her admission about driving around with her mother's body, convinced jurors that she was directly involved. One juror later said that if she had been innocent, she would not have spent days traveling around with her mother in the car. Those notes, the signal, and the shopping trip became the strongest pieces of evidence against her. The trial itself was emotional and intense. Giovanni Gallardo was tried separately. Both teens were charged as adults because of how serious the situation was. During Cynthia's trial, the prosecutor focused on her actions, handing a blade, kicking it away when it fell, and coordinating movements with Gallardo. They said these steps showed clear involvement. Her lawyers pointed out her learning difficulties. They explained she had been in special education classes and struggled to understand and express things clearly. They argued that her notes and statements could have been misunderstood because of her language processing problems. Still, jurors reviewed witness testimony, reports about the graves, and the condition of the bodies. They also saw the pattern of behavior afterward, the selling of jewelry and car parts, the cleanup with mops and napkins, and the shopping trip for Halloween items. To prosecutors, That looked like two teenagers working together to plan and cover up what they had done. The question of motive went beyond just money and parties. In her testimony, Cynthia said she had stolen from her mother because she felt her mother cared more about possessions than about her. The prosecution suggested that those thefts were only the beginning of a bigger plan to remove her parents, take their valuables, and use the money. Her defense lawyers countered that she was a frightened young girl who feared both her boyfriend and her parents. The jury listened to both sides. They decided that the evidence of planning and action was stronger than the claims of fear and past trauma. In May 2013, they found Cynthia Alvarez guilty of first-degree charges in both cases. The deliberations didn't take long. Jurors later told reporters they quickly ruled out the idea that she had been just a bystander. Less than a year later came the sentencing. In January 2014, a judge called the acts vicious and carefully organized. He gave Cynthia a sentence of 51 years to life, allowing her to apply for parole only after 5 decades. The court said this was required because of the laws that give tougher penalties when older teens are involved in such cases. Giovanni Gallardo received life without parole since he was older at the time. Before the judge announced her punishment, Cynthia read a written statement. She said she was scared to spend her life behind bars and that the prosecutors had made her look like a monster. She also said, "I just need to remember my past is my past." That line was later quoted in many reports about the hearing. Both Cynthia and Gallardo's lawyers said they planned to appeal. After the trial, people kept asking one question. Was Cynthia the leader? Did the notes and her actions prove she was the one who planned it all? Some jurors believed she took the lead, while others said both teens shared the responsibility. The court record didn't provide a clear answer that satisfied everyone. Her history of alleged mistreatment and her young age made the situation even more complicated. But in the end, the law focused on her actions and intent, and the jury found both present. Life in prison for someone so young brings its own kind of long, quiet punishment. Cynthia's sentence means she will spend decades in custody before she can ask for parole. State records confirm that she remains in California's correctional system, serving that sentence today. The next 16-year-old was pregnant, scared, and grieving, but detectives soon suspected she was also hiding a secret. And if you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. Amy Priesmeyer was a teenager who should have been thinking about school and her future, but in August 1997, her life took a very different turn. That month, she became part of a case that would take someone's life and take years to untangle. The night everything happened, Amy's boyfriend, Ricky Cowles Jr., was found badly hurt in their Lancaster apartment. Amy, who was 16 and pregnant at the time, made a panicked call for help. When the emergency team arrived, they found Ricky barely conscious. He had been struck with a heavy tool and also shot. His injuries were so severe that he slipped into a coma and passed away a few days later. At first, investigators had no clear suspect. The apartment didn't show signs of a break-in or theft. Nothing suggested a stranger had forced their way inside. That's when detectives started looking at the people closest to Ricky, his girlfriend, and the friends who had been staying with them. This decision turned out to be a major turning point in the case. The first person arrested was not Amy, but William "Billy" Hoffman. Investigators gathered clues linking him to what had happened. In 1999, he was found guilty and given a life sentence. But years later, Hoffman made new statements that changed everything. He said Amy and others had been involved in planning what happened. According to Hoffman, Amy was upset about her pregnancy and blamed Ricky for ruining her life. He said she and her friends had shown him where to hide, how to get inside, and what to do. His words gave investigators the evidence they needed to start building a case against Amy and 2 of her friends. The process took years because the evidence wasn't simple. There was no single piece that proved everything. People gave different stories, denied things, and changed their accounts over time. The man who later admitted being involved had first tried to blame others. Investigators had to put the pieces together from conversations, testimony, and confessions that came long after the fact. When Amy was finally arrested in 2005, prosecutors said they had more than just Hoffman's confession. They had a recording from the jail where Amy spoke with a friend. In that conversation, she seemed to discuss her role in what had happened. Witnesses also told investigators that Amy helped organize the plan and directed Hoffman on what to do. Prosecutors said Amy was angry about being pregnant and wanted Ricky gone. They claimed she and her friends pointed out where someone could hide inside the apartment and how to disable Ricky. They said Hoffman followed that plan. During the trial, Amy denied being part of any plan. Many of the witnesses had already been convicted of their own charges, and some had changed their stories. But the jury heard how the group met, how the weapon was tested in the desert, and how Hoffman entered the apartment. The timeline also mattered. In the week before the incident, Amy and Ricky argued about the friends staying with them. Witnesses said Amy's anger grew stronger, especially over her pregnancy. Prosecutors argued that anger turned into a plan to remove Ricky from her life. The defense said there was no clear proof that Amy had ordered or arranged anything, and that others had their own motives. In 2007, the jury did not believe Amy's claim of innocence. She was convicted of planning and directing the act, with additional findings that it was deliberate and premeditated. In 2008, Amy Priesmer was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. 2 others were also held responsible. Jennifer Kellogg, who had been staying with Amy and Ricky before the incident, pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and received a long prison term. David Ashbury, who provided the firearm used, received a shorter sentence for helping in the plan. Prosecutors said Amy's motive came from anger and resentment. They said she blamed Ricky for the pregnancy and felt trapped. Witnesses described how her frustration turned into action. But anger alone is not a crime. The case needed proof that she helped organize what happened. That proof, prosecutors said, came from Hoffman's statements, the jail recording, and small but important details, like where the attacker hid and how he got inside. The jury found those details convincing. Even after the trial, the story continued. Hoffman later said he felt deep regret. He wrote letters to Ricky's family and eventually had his sentence reduced by Governor Jerry Brown. He was released in 2020 after spending many years behind bars. Later, he gave interviews where he talked about what had happened and his role in it. These interviews and television programs brought the case back into public attention, giving people a clearer timeline of events. As for Amy, her life in prison has been far from the freedom she once imagined. She has been held at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. During her time there, she has written about her experiences and about life inside prison. Her writings do not change what happened to Ricky or his family, but they show what her life has become. A young woman once caught in a tragic plan, now spending her years behind bars, reflecting on the choices that changed everything. Up next is a teenage driver, a stolen van, and a man left alone in the wilderness. Joyce Largo grew up with little public information about her home life. Most accounts of her life focus on the day she walked into adult court as a teenager, rather than her early years. Reporters who have written about her time in prison say she is a member of the Kumeyaay tribe. She was sent to state prison when she was only 16. Sources following her case for years place her at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. This is a large state prison that houses many women serving life sentences. The incident that led to Joyce Largo's conviction was shocking. In the early 1980s, Largo was part of a group of teenagers who came across a man named Dick Sherwood. He was 36 years old and lived in Yuma, Arizona. He had a physical disability that made him vulnerable. The group took his van and the small amount of cash he had on him. They then left him in a remote area. Reports say Sherwood was physically harmed during the encounter and later passed from exposure in the mountains. Largo was reported as the driver for the group. She later said she told herself for years that she did not directly cause the harm because she only drove. At the time, she faced charges of first-degree homicide, abduction, and theft. Court records show that prosecutors treated Largo as more than just an accessory. She was tried as an adult, even though she was still a minor. In November 1983, she was convicted of first-degree homicide and the related offenses. The prosecution argued that the group acted deliberately. They took Sherwood's van and money and left him in a place where he could not survive. Photographs and testimony at the trial showed the jury a clear picture of a disabled man who was alone and vulnerable. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and Largo, still a teenager, left the courtroom as a convicted offender. Why did the group target Sherwood? The trial and reporting suggest a mix of opportunity, poor judgment, and peer pressure. He drove a van and carried cash. His disability made him vulnerable. Teenagers sometimes make choices in groups that they would not make alone. The prosecution argued that the group intended to take his van and money, and the fatal outcome followed. Largo later said that prison programs helped her see the full impact of her actions. She realized her involvement was greater than she had initially admitted to herself. The trial moved quickly compared to modern cases. By November 1983, the IE jury had heard evidence of abduction, theft of $60, and taking of the van. They also learned about the physical harm to Sherwood, and the effects of exposure in the mountains. Reports emphasize that Largo, though a minor, had been tried as an adult. The courtroom process relied on clear evidence and witness testimony, rather than long pre-trial media coverage. Witnesses described how the group took Sherwood from the van and left him in the hills. After conviction, Largo was sentenced to life in prison. For decades, reporting describes her as a lifer at the Central California Women's Facility. The prison has programs aimed at rehabilitation for long-term inmates. Interviews and profiles show Largo as a woman who has served most of her life in prison, from near childhood into middle age. She participated in rehabilitative programs. In at least one account, she said writing an impact statement helped her understand that her role in the incident was bigger than she had originally thought. This reflection shows how long-term inmates can slowly come to terms with their actions. The system treated Joyce Largo, a 16-year-old at the time, as an adult offender. In the early 1980s, courts sometimes tried juveniles as adults in cases involving serious offenses. Largo's case fits this pattern. Despite her youth, prosecutors pushed for adult charges, and the jury convicted her. Over the years, the prison system introduced programs for long-term inmates. Policies around parole for life sentences have also evolved. Public records do not show that she was released. She is consistently described as serving a life sentence. Journalists who wrote from inside prison paint two pictures of Largo. One shows her minimizing her role for many years, saying she only drove. The other shows her later acknowledging more responsibility. She came to this understanding after prison programs asked her to map the effects of her actions. This self-reflection appears in classroom exercises and group sessions, where inmates write letters and study how their choices affected others. From the outside, these changes may seem small, but for parole boards and families, these shifts are meaningful in understanding rehabilitation. Regarding parole, public reporting notes 2 points. First, California has changed how it handles long-term inmates, including more parole hearings. Some lifers have eventually been recommended for parole. Second, there is no clear record that Largo was released. Reporting mentions her participation in programs for long-term inmates and her reflections on her role, but it does not report a parole or release. Available parole board records do not show a hearing outcome for her. This suggests she remains in custody. The next case began with a knock, a familiar face, and a request to use the bathroom. She grew up in Anaheim. By her late teens, her life had narrowed to a few harsh realities: substance use, survival, a string of poor decisions, and 4 children depending on her. Reports from the time and later summaries say she began using strong substances in early adolescence. She was also involved in risky work as a young teen. Those years gave her a reputation in the neighborhood as someone often seen where substance users and dealers gathered. This background did not explain what happened on the afternoon of June 15, 1990, but it set the stage. That day, a 9-year-old girl named Autumn Wallace waited at home after school. Her mother and older sister were out. Autumn knew the neighborhood and the people in it. She knew Alfaro through her older sister and opened the front door when someone she recognized knocked. The visitor asked to use the bathroom. The warm, ordinary detail, a child trusting a familiar face, turned into a tragic moment that changed everything. Investigators later found the house in disorder and a small pile of stolen items. Autumn was found in the bathroom, gravely hurt. The injuries were extreme. Investigators later counted more than 50 wounds. The scene suggested a quick entry meant to steal, which escalated far beyond theft. Alfaro was not unknown to the police. Her fingerprints were found in the house. A red-stained shoe print matched evidence linked to her. During questioning, she gave a taped statement that at first sounded like a confession. She told detectives she had been under the influence of illegal substances that day. In later statements, she changed her story. At one point, she said unknown men had forced her to harm the child. At another, she claimed 2 men had driven her to the house, and 1 forced her to enter. She refused to identify anyone she named. These shifting accounts became part of the legal arguments that followed, but the physical evidence and the sequence reconstructed by investigators did not point clearly to outsiders. The household had been looted, and the stolen goods were later sold for a small sum. Prosecutors said this was to fund substance use. How could this happen in a quiet street? Why would a young woman known to the family with children of her own cause such harm to a child? The jury accepted a straightforward explanation: theft driven by addiction and the need for cash. Prosecutors argued Alfaro entered the home to steal. When Autumn surprised her, She tried to remove the child as a witness. The crime scene and the items taken fit a theft that turned fatal. Medical and forensic reports showing the number and severity of injuries were central to the prosecution's case. They presented it as a deliberate act to silence a witness. The defense focused on her substance use and the shifting accounts, suggesting impaired judgment and possible involvement of others. The jury weighed both sides carefully. The trial moved quickly. A jury convicted Maria del Rocio Alfaro of first-degree harming in March 1992. They found the act happened during a burglary and theft, which exposed her to the harshest penalty under California law. At the sentencing phase, the jury initially could not reach a unanimous decision. They deadlocked 10-2 in favor of the most severe penalty, so the court declared a mistrial on punishment. The state retried the penalty phase. A second jury returned a unanimous recommendation of the harshest penalty. The judge accepted it, making Alfaro one of very few women on California's most serious sentencing list, and the first woman from Orange County to receive it. News reports quoted the judge calling the act senseless, brutal, and vicious. The courtroom was not the end. Appeals and legal motions continued for decades. In 2007, the California Supreme Court reviewed the case and addressed challenges to the conviction and sentence. The court rejected most of Alfaro's claims and upheld both. Later, a federal judge at one point overturned the sentence because of delays in California's system. That decision did not last. In 2017, a federal appeals panel reinstated the sentence, noting Alfaro had not raised the argument properly in state court first. Years of petitions, trial transcripts, and appellate opinions fill the public record. They show how slowly post-conviction processes move. Throughout, the core facts, entry, injuries, and stolen items remained unchanged. The prosecution's motive was clear: money for substances. The stolen items were small and later sold for a few $100s. Alfaro's statements about being under the influence strengthened that view for jurors. The defense asked the jury to consider how addiction affected decision-making and memory. They argued about whether there was clear proof of an intentional plan to harm. The jury deciding responsibility moved quickly. The jury deciding punishment took longer and required a second panel to reach agreement. This split reflected how public reports read. The act left little doubt. The state's response sparked long debate. Autumn Wallace's family carried the story in the public eye. Her mother, when she returned to the house, became the face of the family's loss. Over the years, their push for a final resolution helped sustain attention on the case. Public reporting captured their sorrow and outrage. It noted how the neighborhood shifted after the act. The small payments from stolen goods and the claim that Alfaro sold them for substances were repeatedly mentioned. The image of a little girl seriously harmed in her own home became a recurring, painful detail in every summary and appeal. There are still things we do not know perfectly. Who else, if anyone, was involved in the entry? If Alfaro later changed her story to name others, why did she refuse to identify them? Defense lawyers questioned the reliability of statements made under the influence and whether evidence was fully handled. Prosecutors pointed to the physical proof, the sale of stolen items, and the pattern that matched a theft escalating to severe harm. The legal system resolved the case in phases: trial, sentencing, and appeals. Each step affirmed the conviction and, eventually, the sentence. The long course of appeals shows how such serious cases become both legal matters and tests of procedure, timing, and law. The case began with a bright student's walk home and ended with a teenager's life sentence. Alejandra Guerrero was a teenager from Los Angeles. Her name became linked to one of the most shocking incidents near the University of Southern California in the summer of 2014. On a late July night, Xinran Ji, a 24-year-old electrical engineering graduate student from China, left a study session and walked toward his off-campus apartment. He never made it home. What followed was a night of harm that a jury later determined Guerrero helped carry out. The case and courtroom process lasted years. In the end, she was convicted and given the most severe sentence California allows. The incident itself was short but very intense. Just after midnight on July 24, 2014, G was approached near West 29th Street and Orchard Avenue. The people involved used blunt objects, later identified as a baseball bat and a wrench, to strike him. He tried to run, but they caught him about a block away. They continued striking him until he collapsed on his knees. When his roommate found him the next morning, G had suffered massive injuries and could not recover. Police described the incident as an attempted theft that ended in tragedy. Guerrero was among 4 people arrested in connection with the case. The others were Jonathan Del Carmen, Andrew Garcia, and Alberto Ochoa. Guerrero was only 16 at the time, but prosecutors decided to try her as an adult. They argued that the harm and the severity of the act required adult charges. A jury later agreed. She was tried in 2016 and convicted of first-degree charges, along with multiple counts connected to theft and causing serious harm. What was the motive? Prosecutors described the incident as an armed theft that turned fatal. The group targeted a lone pedestrian late at night. The act looked like a planned ambush, not a sudden fight. Guerrero and the others approached G to steal from him, according to the evidence. But theft alone did not explain the level of harm caused. Why hit a single unarmed student so severely? Witness accounts and evidence showed that the harm went beyond theft and became excessive. The case left a community and a family wondering how a walk home after a study session could end so tragically. At trial, jurors heard about what happened before the act and the chaotic scene afterward. Investigators tracked movements, cell phone records, and witness statements. Some co-defendants said Guerrero was present during the act. Physical evidence showed injuries consistent with the blunt objects described. The defense tried to question Guerrero's role and who caused the fatal injuries, but the jury considered all the evidence and found her guilty. The conviction was for first-degree homicide. Additional convictions included theft and causing harm tied to the same incident. Courtroom coverage showed Guerrero as a young woman who still looked like a teenager, but was held responsible as an adult. She appeared in court with her attorney. After the verdict was read in October 2016, the clerk announced guilty for the homicide charge. Guerrero, then 18 at the time of the trial, reacted quietly. The case attracted attention far beyond Los Angeles, including in China, where G's family and peers followed the court dates closely. Sentencing came in July 2018. The judge gave Guerrero the harshest term, life in prison without the possibility of parole. She asked for mercy and said, "I am so sorry, and I pray that one day they could forgive me." Her plea did not change the sentence. The judge considered the severity of the act, the outcome for G, and the jury's earlier finding before imposing life without parole. Other defendants received different sentences. Jonathan Del Carmen was given 15 years to life. Andrew Garcia was later given life without parole after conviction. The legal process highlighted that being young is not automatically a shield when the actions are serious and evidence shows direct involvement. Prosecutors argued the group worked together to target G. The jury concluded that Guerrero's role met the legal standard for first-degree homicide. The case shows that this was not a random tragedy. It involved people who chose to harm another person, which resulted in a life ending. Family voices were an important part of the story. G's relatives and friends spoke of a bright student with promise, someone who had traveled far to study and whose plans were cut short. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high. Relatives of both the victim and defendants reacted to rulings and sentences. The public could see the weeping, the pleas for mercy, and the calls for justice. These moments showed that beyond legal terms, real lives were changed forever. Court records also show moments from Guerrero's side. She listened to lawyers, endured questioning, and absorbed the verdict and sentence. What stands on record are her courtroom statements and her apology. She said, "I am so sorry," and asked for forgiveness. These words were the clearest expression of remorse during sentencing. In the years since, this case has been cited in discussions about campus safety and student vulnerability. It is also referenced when talking about how the justice system handles young people involved in serious cases. The decision to try Guerrero as an adult raised questions about balancing the facts of a case with the age of the defendant. Lawmakers, journalists, and advocates continue to debate this. For G's family, however, the conversation was secondary to the loss of a young student whose future ended in one violent night. There are no simple answers to the tough questions this case raises. How did a routine walk home turn into tragedy? What made the group act the way they did? How will a young person live with a life sentence while others get different punishments? The court resolved guilt and set punishment. Public records trace a clear path from a late-night robbery attempt to a conviction and life sentence. For the family, for the community, and for everyone watching, the outcome was stark. A young life ended, a sentence handed down, and the long-term effects that follow. Brittany Navarra grew up in a small town in Madera County, California. People there often knew each other's business. High school relationships could feel like the whole world. In 2008, she was still a teenager. A love triangle formed. That same year, 18-year-old Krista Pike was found in her home and did not survive. What began as jealousy and private messages became a plan. Investigators say Brittany moved from anger into action. She did not carry out the physical act at the scene. Instead, she used words that pushed another teenager to do it. The case that followed moved slowly. It drew heavy local attention. After a long process, a jury found that Navarra had planned and directed the act. Prosecutors said Brittany wanted a boyfriend who had been with Krista. They said she wanted him back. That desire was not kept private. Text messages became central evidence. Investigators found conversations where Navarra urged Dustin Gran, who was then 18, to go to Krista's house and take care of the problem. Gran later admitted that he carried out the act. Why would a teenager push someone else to do this? Jealousy alone usually does not lead to planning. The texts and the timeline showed more than a momentary fit of anger. They showed repeated urging. Prosecutors said the messages amounted to asking someone to commit a fatal act. The jury agreed. The jury decided that Navarra's words and actions made her responsible for what happened. The incident was severe. The medical examiner reported injuries consistent with repeated blunt force and multiple sharp force wounds. Testimony at trial said the victim had been struck with a weight and suffered several cuts. The harm was prolonged. Those details supported the most serious charges. The community found it hard to accept that a local rivalry among teenagers could escalate like that. The evidence showed that one teenager convinced another to cross that line. The victim did not survive. The legal path from arrest to verdict was long and bumpy. Gran was tried first. His jury reached a quick decision. The jury found him guilty and found he was sane at the time. He received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Navarra's case moved more slowly. It was delayed by pretrial motions and by at least one finding of prosecutorial misconduct that caused pauses and retrials. Her trial was moved out of Madeira because of intense publicity. The defense asked for a fair setting, and the court agreed to change venues. When the jury heard the evidence, the messages, the timelines, and the witness accounts of the relationships and hostilities, they finished quickly. They convicted Navarra of the most serious charge, a first-degree offense. The speed of the verdict surprised some people who had followed the case. It reflected how tightly the prosecution had linked the pieces of evidence. In February 2015, a judge sentenced Brittany Navarra to life in prison with no possibility of parole. At sentencing, the court listed factors that supported the maximum punishment. The court cited a deliberate plan, the recruitment of another person to carry out the act, and the brutality of what happened. For Krista's family, the sentence offered a measure of closure. It did not erase the loss. For Navarra, it meant moving from a teenager in her community into the adult prison system for the rest of her life. Questions about Navarra's juvenile status came up again in appeals and in public debate about how juveniles should be sentenced. Her attorneys argued that changes to juvenile sentencing should apply to her. In 2017, the California Court of Appeal upheld the conviction. The court ruled that the changes under Proposition 57 did not apply retroactively to her case. In other words, later rules about parole consideration did not undo the life sentence she had received. That decision kept the original sentence in place and closed off one legal route to earlier release. The appellate opinion explained the court's reasoning and affirmed the trial court's judgment. During the trial and the news coverage, people asked a simple question: who carried out the physical act? The jury found that Dustin Gran did that. The jury also found that Brittany Navarra had pushed, encouraged, and directed him through messages and meetings. The court concluded that the repeated requests and the clear chain from message to action crossed the legal line. The record included texts and witness testimony that showed a plan rather than a brief outburst. The law treats solicitation and conspiracy as serious when they lead to a fatal incident. That is what the jury concluded had happened. Public reaction in Madeira and beyond followed the case closely. Local papers and TV stations covered the story in detail. Programs about real criminal cases also discussed it. For Krista Pike's family, the coverage had two effects. It kept the case in the public eye, and it meant reliving difficult details. In the years after sentencing, the case returned to news reports linked to broader questions about juvenile justice reform in California. Voters passed measures that changed how juvenile offenders might be treated. Navarra's legal team pursued appeals and hearings that sought retroactive relief under those changes. Courts repeatedly rejected those routes or limited their scope. The court records and appellate rulings kept the life sentence in place. Rachel Mullenix grew up in Huntington Beach, in a family that seemed ordinary on the surface. Neighbors described them as a normal household. Her exact birth date is not widely published, but records show she was a teenager when the incident happened. She became an adult by the time of her trial and sentence. Her mother, Barbara Mullenix, was the center of the home. Friends and family said Barbara was attentive and protective. This family dynamic became a focus in the courtroom. During her teenage years, Rachel had a difficult relationship with an older man named Ian Allen. Prosecutors later said this relationship triggered the events that followed. On September 13, 2006, the family's life changed suddenly and tragically. Barbara Mullenix, in her mid-50s, was found lifeless. Her body showed more than 50 sharp injuries. Forensic experts described the scene in court and in news reports. They said multiple sharp objects may have been used. One particularly shocking detail reported was a kitchen-style butter tool found in an eye. Her body was recovered near the Newport Harbor Yacht Club. Investigators believe this was not a single impulsive act, but a planned and harmful event. Prosecutors argued that Rachel played a key role in the plan. They said she grew angry when her mother disapproved of her relationship with Allen. They claimed she influenced Allen to commit the act. According to the district attorney, Rachel and Allen harmed Barbara in her Huntington Beach condo. Then they moved the body to Newport Harbor, trying to hide it, and fled to Louisiana. Authorities later located them in Louisiana. The Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Department detained them and returned them to Orange County. The prosecution said the motive was family conflict and jealousy. They presented evidence suggesting Rachel actively planned and helped carry out the incident rather than being a passive bystander. The trial was intense and public. Rachel claimed she did not harm her mother. She said she saw Allen on top of Barbara and causing the injuries repeatedly. She maintained Allen was the one responsible. The prosecution presented forensic evidence. Experts described multiple sharp objects and the intensity of the injuries, suggesting more than one person was involved. Witnesses and text messages showed the difficult relationship between Rachel and her older boyfriend. These details also suggested planning and coordination. Jurors had to consider two stories: a young woman claiming she was present but not responsible, versus the DA's argument that she had organized and assisted in the plan. Prosecutors explained the motive as a mix of intense feelings for Allen and anger at parental control. Rachel was young and in love with an older man who, according to prosecutors, was willing to follow her instructions. Her mother's concern and attempts to guide her daughter back toward family life became points of conflict. The prosecution presented this as a conflict between a parent trying to protect her child and a teen reacting in ways that escalated into harm. The defense said Rachel was a scared young woman caught in a situation she did not intend to create. The jury sided with the prosecution. Investigators pieced the events together using forensic evidence, witness statements, and tracking the suspects after the event. The couple's flight to Louisiana and capture there provided a direct link. Forensic experts described the wounds, the variety of blades, and DNA and trace evidence tying the pair to the scene. Text messages and other communications were used to show the relationship and possible motives. Prosecutors said the number and severity of the injuries showed a level of personal involvement beyond a spontaneous act. The defense tried to create doubt over technical points and memory gaps, but the evidence and story of planning and flight convinced the jury. In July 2008, the jury found Rachel Mullenix guilty of first-degree charges and related offenses. She was convicted for taking part in the incident and for planning to dispose of the body. Her partner, Ian Allen, was also convicted. Both were treated as adults in the justice system. In October 2008, the judge sentenced Rachel, then 19, to 25 years to life in prison. The sentence reflected the severity of her actions and the impact on Barbara's family and the community. At sentencing, Rachel kept insisting she had not caused the injuries herself. She said, "I don't care what the jury thought. I did not do that to my mother. I made some bad choices, but I did not do this." Courtroom moments were emotional. Rachel also said, "My mom was my world. She was my life. And somebody saying that I would hurt her really affects me because I didn't." These words reflected her attempt to claim innocence and explain a life torn apart. The judge and Barbara's family listened to detailed descriptions of what happened. For her family, nothing could replace the loss. The legal outcome, with both defendants serving sentences of 25 years to life, closed the case legally but left questions about motives and remorse.